Hi everyone, welcome. Here are the big takeaways from this Meltzoff reading assignment, Chapter 2, on research questions and hypotheses. First, on our Blackboard page for this topic, inside the folder, be sure to study the document called Samples Coming Up With Your Research Idea, where you'll find some samples of successful research questions from past students. Page 1 of that document reviews all of the important rules to follow in writing your research questions, and then the remaining pages give several samples of what a final product can look like. So the first big takeaway from this chapter, for your research question, be sure to identify the characteristics of a true experiment and don't accidentally design a correlational study. Your research idea that will be made more specific as your research question must be a true experiment that proposes to investigate a cause and effect relationship. The cause, also known as the independent variable, is the event being manipulated or varied by the investigator. The effect or outcome, also known as the dependent variable, is the behavior that changes as a result of that manipulation or that variation. Note that experiments require splitting your initial population of participants and assigning them into at least two types of comparative groups. One group, often called your experimental group, experiences the independent variable being examined, and the other comparison group, often called your control group, does not experience the independent variable. Alternatively, the experimental group will experience one variation of the independent variable, while the control group will experience a different variation of the same independent variable. But that second group, or control group, is really important because it provides a standard of comparison in order to examine if something really did change in that first group as a result of varying the independent variable in some way. Second big takeaway from this chapter. In this chapter, we discuss how you will transform your research idea into a specific research question for your research proposal. So first we review from Chapter 1 the characteristics of good science in psychology. Now, many concepts that we want to study in psychology are kind of vague and we need to get more specific, like marital satisfaction or juvenile delinquency, that represent multiple human experiences and situations. But science needs us to get very specific and define our terms very carefully, right? Only specific concepts that can be measured and assign numbers that represent varying levels of high, medium, and low can be studied. So high, medium, and low levels of depression, high, medium, and low mathematical ability, high, medium, and low levels of self-esteem. Only our psychological variables must be made tangible and quantifiable, where we convert them into numbers, high, medium, and low. Remember, we're going to use them in statistical analyses down the road. So the first principle in moving from your research idea to your research question is moving from general to specific. What exactly do you mean by this you're studying? Moving from general to specific of the outcome that you're trying to measure. Outcome means dependent variable, so concentrate on that first. Get specific and define our terms very tangibly. What exactly do you mean by marital satisfaction? What exactly do you mean by juvenile delinquency, for example? The second principle in moving from your general research idea to your specific research question consists of moving from interesting ideas that we like in psychology to some measurable representation of that. So you'll pick one of those three ways to measure any psychological variable. Self-report, like a questionnaire with a numerical scale. Behavioral observations, like the frequency of some behavior that represents a mental state, or physiological measures, like heart rate or blood pressure. Three ways to measure any psychological variable. You'll pick one of those. For example, if you want to design a study to decrease level of depression, plan to measure the varying levels of specific depressive symptoms that make up the disorder, low, medium, and high. So you have to unpack depression into its specific symptoms. Now, questionnaires already exist for that one, like the brief form of the Beck Depression Inventory. That would be a self-report questionnaire. More complex one here. If, for example, you wanted to propose a study to decrease juvenile delinquency in at-risk teenagers, you would plan to measure the specific factors that make up juvenile delinquency, such as the number of missed school days or the number of disciplinary problems in school. Notice ultimately we get so specific that we can quantify our variable. That is, we can make it into numbers with levels that are high, medium, and low. Like more missed days of school versus less missed days of school. And finally, takeaway number 3 from this chapter, regarding the overall goal of this chapter, we want to emphasize that writing your research question, this step, is an extremely important step, first step in the research process. Writing your research question, guys, really is the foundation for writing the rest of your research proposal. Done well, you will discover the next steps in the research proposal writing fall right into place. Done poorly, the research question, you'll encounter obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. So take your time, get this right. Be sure to follow Kurlinger's criteria, talked about in this chapter, representing 3 criteria that good research questions must have. Number 1, the variables should express a relationship. Number 2, the variables should be in question form. Does my causal variable increase or decrease my effect variable? Should be in the form of a question. And number 3, of course, the question implies the possibility of empirical testing. In other words, it fits all the characteristics of a good research question. Be sure to follow Kurlinger's criteria. So in summary, the big takeaways from this Meltzoff reading assignment, Chapter 2 on research questions and hypotheses are these. Number 1, for your research question, be sure to identify the characteristics of a true experiment and don't accidentally design a correlational study. Number 2, in this chapter, we transform your research idea into a specific research question for your final proposal. We move from general to specific and ultimately seek a measurable representation of your variable that shows high, medium, and low. Number 3, remember that writing this research question, guys, is an extremely important first step in the research process. Follow Kurlinger's criteria. Those are the big takeaways from this Meltzoff reading, Chapter 2 on research questions and hypotheses. Thanks, everybody.